Hello, welcome to tonight's Festival of Ideas. I'm Nicole Lindstrom, a senior lecturer in politics at the University of York. I'm also a scholar of European Union politics, so it's my real pleasure to chair our event tonight. Tonight's event is part of York Festival of Ideas Online, although in a different format. The festival continues to aim to enhance York's reputation as a city of ideas and innovation through offering the highest caliber of public events. The 2020 festival has over 40 online events offering an inspiring program for all ages. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the adventure we are about to take you on. I'd like to just say a few technical notes. If you're watching live, you can ask questions using the Q&A button on your screen. This is available throughout the talk, so questions can be asked at any time. Should you have any technical issues, such as a loss of Wi-Fi, you can rejoin the event using the original link. Please also remember that today's event is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it again. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Dr. Denis MacShane. Few people are as better positioned to give us insights about Brexit and its aftermath than the person who coined the term back in 2012. A Labour MP for 18 years and author of Brexiternity, most recently The Uncertain Fate of Britain, Dr. MacShane explains how the Brexit process will be long and full of difficulties and will dominate British political and business life for years to come. So many of you will know Denis MacShane from his long experience in British politics. He was a Labour MP for Rotherham from 1994 to 2012. A former Minister for Europe, he served on the Council of Europe and NATO Parliamentary Assembly, representing the UK as a Member of Parliament. He has written 18 books, mainly on international affairs. As a decade as a BBC journalist during the 1980s, he worked on supporting companies and trade unions throughout difficult transition eras in Poland, South Africa, South Korea, and Brazil. He has lectured on European politics at universities in America, Africa, and Asia. He writes regularly for European and US media outlets, where you can find his ongoing, very important insights into Brexiternity. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our speaker tonight, Dr. Denis MacShane.
Great. Well, hello, everybody. Fantastic to be with you on screen. I started life as a BBC producer, as Nicole kindly said, in that rather over-eulogious, no, what's the word? What's the adjective from eulogy? Presentation. But I'd much rather have been with you in present, in chair et os, as the French say, in flesh and blood. But the great joy of doing it on Zoom is I can have my little glass of white wine by my side to cheer myself up. Now, I'm going to try not to talk too long. I can. I think it was Lenin who said that the first hour was simply opening remarks, but I'll try and hold it down a bit to allow as many questions to come in as possible, because that for me in this Brexit dialogue, it's not just since Brexit started, but really, if I think about it, my whole life coming back to Britain from Switzerland, where I was working in international trade union campaigns in 1994 to be an MP, and straight away I plunged into the Europe debate. It has been as big a debate in our political life as anything, or those of us who studied English political constitutional history of the 19th century. We remember the Corn Laws, we remember the Irish question, we remember Catholic emancipation. Frankly, Brexit is up there. We call it Brexit now, it's the Europe question. And I took part in all the debates in the Commons and very friendly relations with the anti-European gang. But in the end, my side lost. I first used the word Brexit, as Nicole said in 2012. I was writing a lot about Greek politics then, and Grexit was very fashionable. Without really thinking about it, I said, supposing instead of Brexit, instead of Grexit, Greece leaving the Eurozone or maybe the EU, we might have to put up with Brexit. I had no idea that not prophecy so much as a hint was actually going to come true. 2014, I wrote this book, Brexit, How Britain Will Leave Europe. Nobody would believe me. I went from seminar to seminar, business conference to business conference, talked to politicians and ministers of all sorts, and they all patted me on the back and said, don't worry, Dennis, don't be silly. The British people won't be that stupid. Well, I have no pleasure in saying I was proved right, but I was. And it's been a constant problem ever since in defining what can happen next. I've written a couple of other books on Brexit, but this is the latest one called Brexiternity. Again, a new word I've made up myself, Brexiternity. It's going to last an awful long time. And I was just looking at my other computer because my printer didn't work today. I was very interested to see Pascal Lamy, who I'm sure Nicole knows who he is, and some other friends and colleagues will. He was Jacques Delors' chief of staff. Then he was a European Commissioner for Trade, and then he was Director General for 8 years of the World Trade Organization. I served with him on the Notre Europe Foundation. We, together with other people, helped select the European Book of the Year prize. But Pascal's wonderful, he's very witty, he's very warm, but no man knows more about Europe, in my view, than he does. And he gave an interview to the Aberdeen Press and Journal, which for those of you who follow these things will know that was the first paper Michael Gove worked on after Oxford. He comes from Aberdeen. Some people, I think, very unfairly are referring to him as COVID-19. I don't know where that term comes from, but that's doing a lot of rounds on the political networks. And in his interview with the P&J, it's a very big paper up in northeast Scotland, Pascal says that Brexit is going to last 70 years. I don't know if that's longer than Brexiternity, but I think he's right. I think MPs yet unborn, Nicole, famous professors and lecturers like you, yet unborn, will be writing and talking and seminaring about Brexit and Europe for many, many years to come. Because in essence, we can't disentangle ourselves from Europe. We're part of, in John Donne's phraseology, we're part of the whole. Okay, we've got 20 miles of water between us and France, but Ireland is Europe's offshore continental island, and all of our politics come from Europe, all of our trade's been based on Europe, all of our good things, some of our bad things are interconnected with Europe. So this idea that you could simply get out a big pair of scissors and cut Britain off from Europe was always nonsense. And we're finding that out now, aren't we, in the so-called Brexit negotiations taking place like this little talk by Zoom between a team in London and Michel Barnier, my old friend, in Brussels. So, the most fatuous phrase of the whole Brexit process, I think, was the election slogan in December, "Get Brexit done." Well, we've left the treaty. We're no longer an EU member. Anybody think we've got Brexit done? It's going to go on an awful, long time. Now, Pascal's suggestion in his Press and Journal interview was that all the diplomats should be kicked out of the meetings and they should be replaced by fishermen. Pascal, I don't know whether he comes from Boulogne or some fishing port, has a romantic view that is it fishermen or fisher people? I'm not quite sure the technical term these days, are much, much better at negotiating these things. And it is true that the fisher people, boats people of France and Britain, and of course a bit of Spain and Belgium and the Netherlands, have lived together in some kind of relationship for 1,000 years. I mean, every fish that you find in the North Sea each day crosses 9 different territorial borders. And despite Priti Patel's best efforts, fishes don't have passports. So we've had to sort of adjust to each other. I think that Pascal's point was, if you could get people who had an experience of living together and were post-ideological about Europe, maybe some solution might be fine. Because I think, you know, fishing is quite an important metaphor. I know French politics very well. I wrote a biography of François Mitterrand in 1982, the first one in English. I'm looking to update it possibly for his 40th anniversary of his election next year. And I know the Macron team, and when I go to Paris and I want to, I can go into the Elysee and have a little bit of a chat, talk to people who are his politicians regularly, they're all friends. And the idea Emmanuel Macron can go into his 2022 election against Marine Le Pen, having, as it were, sold out, to use a Brexit term, the fishing communities of France from Boulogne in the north, or just opposite us at Dover, down to Saint-Jouin-de-Luz, the lovely little town at the bottom of the French coastline of the Atlantic, right, bordering on the Atlantic. It's a big fishing community. The idea he can sort of sell them down the river to please Dominic Cummings or the Daily Express is absurd. And that's the point. Very quickly, as Nicole, I'm sure, knows, all European technical problems become ultra political. But nobody, I keep reading the English press, even papers written by friends of mine like The Guardian, The Independent, and they don't seem to understand how political Europe is and how it's 27 sovereign independent governments that are making the running on the negotiations with us. Well, the other big slogan, of course, of the Brexit years was the famous one, take back control. And if ever that was a fake slogan, we're now learning it, because the people who are taking back control are Nissan, who are saying, we're going to take back control of our plant in Sunderland, because we can't keep it here if you don't obtain access to the single market. There's a very nice woman called Caroline Fairburn. She's Director General of the CBI, the bosses, you know, the Bosses Federation, the Manufacturing Industrial Federation. She had a fascinating, I think very important article this week. I just want to quote it directly to you. She said, unless the dynamic shifts, it looks like both sides will stay trapped in a holding pattern. This is about the negotiations, with no trade deal, a real possibility at the end of the year, when the transition period is scheduled to end. For businesses, jobs, and economic confidence in this most challenging of years, this will be a shocking outcome. With 40% of the economy closed, 8 million people in furlough and not working, the UK is already in recession. For many firms fighting to keep their heads above water through the crisis, the idea of preparing for a chaotic change in EU trading relationships in 7 months is beyond them. They are not remotely prepared. Faced with the desperate challenges of the pandemic, their resilience and ability to cope is almost zero. So there she is, announcing on behalf of British capitalism, the economy, a very important truth. But her article appears in a paper published in Brussels called Politico. It's mainly online. It's very, very good. But it's read principally by European obsessives and the people who work in the European institutions. Has she said that message to Conservative MPs? Has she written it in the Daily Telegraph or the Times, maybe, the Independent? No. because by and large, the business community has got under the duvet in July 2016 when the plebiscite was announced, and since then have said nothing. They left it all to political people, Theresa May to begin with, then Boris Johnson, all the time Dominic Cummings and Michael Gove, a little bit on the Labour side, Jeremy Corbyn, or heroes like Barry Gardner. I love Barry, but that's ironic. And so for the first time in my lived life, and it's not as short as I would wish it to be, the business community, British capitalism, is saying absolutely nothing about their core interests on this issue. And so the whole Brexit debate has been conducted as a private internal war inside the Tory party, with the result we all know, the complete rout of sensible pragmatists like Philip Hammond and Theresa May and Jeremy Hunt and so forth. Complete victory now, so far, for Dominic Cummings and lifelong anti-Europeans like COVID-19, Dominic Raab, Priti Patel. Labour, of course, couldn't handle Brexit after 2015. The problem was Jeremy Corbyn. I know Jeremy, 30, 40 years. He's a very polite, middle-class, private school educated guy. I always explain to friends, he's a preacher. He's an idealist, not an ideologue. He's a moralist, not a Marxist. He sees wrong things happening around the world and he denounces them. And a lot of the wrong things he denounces, I would denounce. But what he doesn't do is synthesize that in any way into a political program or into an election-winning program and bring the party and country around with it. We're not getting into a Corbyn debate, that's for another event. I'll tell you a story though, Nicole, which you might be amused by. A year ago, I went to the funeral of a lovely Welsh Labour MP called Paul Flynn, who died aged 84, wonderful man. Big funeral in Newport, where he was the MP. Wonderful Welsh singing and Welsh preaching, and all the Labour Party was there in their black suits and white shirts and black ties, and the women were there, and it was very moving. And suddenly Jeremy appeared and did a wonderful eulogy for Paul, who was a good pro-European. Jeremy and I were chatting afterwards, and I said to him, Jeremy, thank you so much for that lovely talk on Paul. He's a good comrade and friend, and really appreciate you come all the way down here to pay that final tribute. And he said, oh, thank you very much, Dennis. Thank you. That was really nice. Tell me, I didn't say anything wrong on Europe, did I? Well, it was a funeral. Jeremy was leader of my party. I'm not going to be rude to him to his face. So I said, no, it was fine. What I wanted to say was, the problem, Jeremy, is you've never said anything right on Europe, but it wasn't particularly the occasion. So Labour couldn't handle Brexit after 2015, so after 2016, really. The time being, Sir Keir Starmer, who I think has made a terrific start as Labour Party leader, would prefer that no one mentioned Brexit in his presence. He and his shadow cabinet adopt a policy of the three wise monkeys, sort of see no Brexit, show no Brexit, hear no Brexit. Well, that might do for the time being, and I'm not criticising for a second the tactical choice. But the issue of Europe will no more go away than the great issues of the 19th century, like the Irish question, like emancipation of working people and women, could go away. And a grown-up party should stop pretending that the issue of Europe's gone away and say nothing about it. Well, there are many different crises we've got in Britain. A crisis, I think, of the state of the realm, Her Majesty, great shape at 94, husband, 98, 99 this year, the heir to the throne, suffering from coronavirus. It's very interesting. This is the first moment of crisis in Britain. I'm thinking about coronavirus now, when the royal family has not had a single representative in London. You've got her grandson disappearing off to America, a bit like the Duke of Windsor did, King Edward. And I think we're in for a constitutional crisis linked to Brexit, bigger than we realise. The second problem is the kingdom is united. Scotland would not will not accept the idea of rule of English and a very narrow elite of rich English politicians in the south saying all 5 million Scots have got no right to be European. So we're going to see the Scottish Parliament election next May. Whether and how that manifests itself in the ballot box, I don't know. I don't support Scotland breaking the union with England any more than I support Britain breaking the union with Europe. That's just a private view. But that issue completely, as it were, squashed under the impact of coronavirus is going to come back with a bang. Similarly, in Northern Ireland, we're seeing now the Northern Irish Assembly voting, like the Welsh Assembly, or Senate as it likes to be called now, the Scottish Parliament, to demand an extension to the talks, which Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings have absolutely ruled out and won't happen. I'll talk about that in a second. But they're now saying, a majority in the Stormonts, in the Northern Irish Assembly, we must keep a relationship with Europe. The majority of students at Queen's University in Belfast, one of the bastions of Protestant higher education, a magnificent university, majority of students there now are Catholics from Northern Ireland and from the south. So bit by bit, we're seeing the 6 counties of Northern Ireland detaching themselves. And we've got now, I think, a third crisis, which is very, very interesting, constitutional crisis, which has been produced by Brexit. And that is, are we gliding towards a one-party state in the sense of Erdogan in Hungary or Kaczynski in Poland, Erdogan in Turkey, Orbán in Hungary, Kaczynski in Poland? Because Brexit has robbed Labour of a lot of its core support. It is just one Labour MP in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and Labour without Scottish MPs cannot form, in my judgment, a national majority government in the UK. It's lost support in northern seats, anti-immigration seats, Tories and Cummings in 2016 and in 2019 brilliantly blended ancient dislike of the foreigner, the incomer, the immigrant that was particularly generated by Enoch Powell into applying that to the European question because of the number of Europeans that are living and working amongst us. So Britain itself is having to recast so many difficult aspects of its constitutional political relationships, fights between different parts of the UK, between different generations, between older people who dislike foreigners and other older people who want to retire to Europe, problems for every sector of the community. The farming community are going to lose, half of all our lamb exports go to Germany. We don't have a single market access. Where are they exported to? 75% of all our fresh fruit and veg on sale tomorrow in your local Morrisons or Sainsbury's or Asda, and ditto where I am in London, will have come in lorries arriving through Dover and Calais. If there isn't complete freedom of exchange, then there'll be queues. There are 30-hour queues and longer on the Turkish and EU border. People talk about Canada. I love Canada. My son-in-law comes from Canada. But for goodness sake, we don't have 10,000 lorries arriving from Canada every day in Dover and Calais, bringing our fresh vegetables and fruit. 62% of all our bacon and bangers and ham also come from the continent of Europe through that choke point. And if there's disruption to that, then we all saw the empty shelves in our supermarkets, I think at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Wait and see what it's like when the food stops arriving. You've got fishing, I mentioned that already. Road haulage. 10,000 lorries coming through Calais and Dover in both directions every day. under all regimes, when you don't have a single market, those lorries have to be checked. Some stuff can be pre-checked in their factories, but lorries, vans, bringing in individual food, individual components, they're just customs controls. And they can't be done away with. When you work out, just assume each custom control lasts 2 minutes, which is miraculously short. I lived 100 meters from the French-Swiss border, and even my car was looked at now and then as we crossed the border, though the customs control people knew who I was, and I had a little badge saying I could pass freely. That's going to disrupt trade massively. Financial services, forget it. That's 10, 50% of the UK economy, our biggest exporter, scores of thousands of jobs in the city. They all earn far too much in my view, but they pay a huge amount of tax. All of their, not all, but much of their income is derived from selling products, insurance products, investment funds into Europe. That's going to collapse. The automobile manufacturing sector, Nissan, Toyota, Honda, Jaguar, Land Rover, all depending on sales to Europe. That will be under pressure. Travel, we see all that on the television at the moment. Huge amounts of tourism in both ways. You can't run a tourism industry when you are telling every European who wants to come to the Lake District or the Yorkshire Dales, they have to spend 14 days in quarantine when they arrive here. And then the creative industry, much misunderstood, worth about 130 billion, exports 30 billion a year to Europe, from architecture to videos, and in between all the professional creative services, which we make a lot of money selling them. They're there because you can jump on a plane and go anywhere without let or hindrance. That stops. That sector will have real difficulties. So what's going to happen now? I'll try and wrap it up. There are negotiations going on. They're not doing very much. Partly coronavirus is messing it up, and people doing this by Zoom. I mean, I've done those negotiations for European treaties and agreements. You go into the big building with Tony Blair and Jacques Chirac and Gerhard Schröder, whoever, and you sit in your little office, team offices, and then you send out envoys all the time to cut deals, to change a few words here for the constitutional treaty. And you'll go and have coffee with somebody and say, look, will this work? Tony, I think we can get the French to do this if we do that. Yeah, go and try and fix it, Dennis. You can't do that on Zoom. So these negotiations are really almost irrelevant. Can they be extended? Well, yes, but it will require Britain to ask for that to be extended. As we know, Boris Johnson doesn't want to ask that. He's still very nervous. He thinks his party is absolutely wedded to a very hard Brexit, and that is what Cummings keeps breathing into his ears. I'm sort of less sure. I believe my reading of the Conservative Party is that for 300 years, they have been the best party in adapting to new realities. They're the first, they're a land-owning party. They get out of that into the Industrial Revolution. They're a manufacturing party. They get out of that into professional services. They're an imperial party, and then they decolonize, and so on and so forth. And the bottom line for the Conservative Party is always to make enough money for their supporters. In other words, to keep Britain turning over, and out of that money, tax it, as low as possible, but tax it to provide all the core public services, the good roads and railways, the post office, the military, the army, that a modern state needs. And they've been incredibly successful in adapting to it. And we don't forget, Labour was the anti-European party between 1950 until about late 1980s, and it was the Tories that took us into Europe, that signed the Single Act, that negotiated or agreed to Maastricht, and Labour really was a passenger on the European boat that the Tories had laid the foundations for, then launched, and then on the whole steered under Ted Heath, Margaret Thatcher, even in his odd way, John Major. Now, are they really, really ready to turn their backs on Europe completely and utterly? Or can they think we've left the treaty, so House of Commons now is sovereign, but a sovereign House of Commons can decide that the best trading relationship with our biggest trading bloc of partners is roughly what exists today. A sovereign House of Commons could decide that in the interests of British security, we should have access to the common databases of criminal activity, terrorist activity, fraud activity in Europe. British police made 571 million requests last year for access to that information about individuals or about stolen goods. We really want to throw that out of the window? Are we quite sure that we want to buy into American food? Like many of us, I expect, I've had great meals in America and so far I've survived. Nonetheless, because of the giant size of the American food economy, they have to have very heavy duty chemical and disinfectant and bacterial controls. And so there are about according to the American Center for Disease Control, which is about the best in the world, there are 6 to 8 million food poisoning cases in America each year, with about 6,000 fatalities in hospital. Will the British people vote for that? I think not. Liam Fox and the ultra-American faction inside the Conservative Party see no problem. I beg leave to doubt. So we're gonna, I think, keep negotiating. We won't ask for an extension at this stage. We can walk at any moment, crash out, accept the consequences, but I think we'll keep talking for a bit. So a lot of the Conservative Party still believes in the Churchill injunction, jaw is better than war, but it will depend on public mood, where we are after coronavirus, whether business is prepared to say anything, put its head above the parapet. Frankly, COVID-19, the virus, doesn't know if it's a Remainer or a Brexiter. It's not interested in those politics. And I think that's been a huge change. Now, there is an argument that says, oh, well, Boris Johnson can get through a crash out no deal hidden under the general economic calamity of coronavirus. That's a fashionable thesis. Again, I beg leave to doubt, because I think that the coronavirus hasn't stopped hasn't stopped the arrival of fresh food in our supermarkets after the first, funny week when everybody stockpiled like that. But Brexit can do that. Coronavirus hasn't stopped our police and MI5 chasing every criminal up and down every hill and dale of Europe through the information exchange system. A hard Brexit would do that. Our financial services people are still working hard, they're still investing, they're still looking after our money as well as they can, and making money out of Europe. The rest of the world after coronavirus, from America to China to India to anywhere, ain't going to be in very, very good shape, whereas Europe is piling in 750 billion euros, apparently going up by 500 billion. I mean, this is serious money to keep the European economy afloat once the specific sort of death casualty part of the crisis disappears. Do we want to be excluded from that? I don't know. So the talks, I think, technically, it's a technical legal issue, this, but discussing it with a number of friends, I think they could keep going into 2021 without Boris Johnson having to demand an extension now. I think the watchword should be festina lente. And since I'm talking to a York University audience, I know all of you will understand what that means. So will Boris Johnson as a classicist. Whether Dominic Cummings does, I'm not quite sure, but make haste slowly. There's no need to hurry things along just for the sake of an artificial deadline. So in conclusion, Brexit is not going to go away for a long time. 4 years ago, in 2016, about 1/3 of the total registered electorate voted to leave Europe. 2/3 didn't. And in all democracies, if you don't vote, it doesn't count. Nonetheless, in most constitutional democracies, that's to say democracies with a constitution, if they allow referendums, they demand 50% or 60% of all people to say yes to something. They demand double majorities like in Switzerland. They demand minimum turnouts. We didn't do any of that in 2016. I'm not debating the result. My side lost after a disastrous campaign run by David Cameron. Jeremy Corbyn wasn't even in the game. As for that man from Marks and Spencer's, God, no wonder that's a failing company if he was in charge of the of the anti-Brexit campaign in 2016. So, 1 in 3 voters in Britain voted for Brexit. We're going to have to live with that. The changes in Britain are going to last a long, long time. There's an eternity to work through. So in conclusion, Nicole, welcome to Brexiternity. And I'll come back next week, maybe next year, whoops, if I'm invited with another book, and we'll see if my prophecies turn out to be true. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the very stimulating talk. We're getting quite a few questions, excellent questions coming in. Many more than we'll have time to answer in the next 20 minutes. But what I'll do is I'll cluster some of the questions since they all touch on somewhat similar issues. And to give people a few more minutes to answer your question, I'd like to start with one. So today, if you watch Prime Minister's Question Time, one thing that was notable in many of Johnson's answers was resorting to this use of the people. So the people want, or the people are demanding, etc., which is a kind of continuation of what you call in your book, you know, the democracy of plebiscites. This idea of the will of the people that's defined so much of our politics since the referendum. And as you said in your talk, in the new future of both the highly technical issues of Brexit and the fallout from COVID, in your view, what's the chance of us returning to something more in line with the traditional norms of parliamentary representative democracy?
I think reasonably strong. Everybody knows, when I was a BBC reporter many, many years ago, we did what were called Vox Pops. You went out with a microphone, you put it under, you said, you know, what do you think of this? You gathered 6, 10 people and cut them all together. Now, where does the term Vox Pop come from? It's a Latin phrase called Vox Populi, the voice of the people. And it's the line is, the voice of the people is the voice of God. I'm not going to run through the Latin because Boris Johnson isn't listening. But the actual phrase says, it's by Alcuin, who was the biographer of Charlemagne about 700 or 800 after in today's era. He said, nor should we listen to the people who say Vox Populi, the voice of the people is the voice of God, because the clamour of the mob is often close to insanity. And I'm reasonably confident, I could be desperately wrong, populism is not succeeding that well. I don't want to talk too much about Trump. 2016 was the Brexit Trump year. It was the Salvini year. It was the Steve Bannon year. It was the Marine Le Pen year. All of those people are not doing brilliantly at the moment. I mean, the polling from America is very, very good. In other words, it's very bad for Trump in many different areas. I mean, 66% disapprove of his statements and actions on the since the killing of George Floyd. And an interesting thing, Nicole, for any of our French-speaking participants, the police officer who knelt on that poor man and sort of began the process of choking him to death, was called George Chauvin, exactly the same name where we get chauvinism from, because it was a army officer in the Napoleonic army after 1815 called Chauvin, who tried to say the French have to hate everybody, France is best, it's ultra patriotic. So incredible. Here we are 200 years later, and the guy who commits this atrocious nationalist identity act on a black guy is called Chauvin. So I'm not sure. I think a lot of internal tensions in the Conservative Party. I think Mr. Johnson, Boris, I've known him a long time. He's almost a friend. That's a bit crazy, but we're very friendly when we meet. He has many great qualities. He's a brilliant, speech maker, great after-dinner speech maker, great have I got news for you, great rouser of the faithful, and very enthusiastic and positive about everything. But he's not a prime minister. You can sense this every time. I just saw him again at 5 o'clock. He's grumpy, he's bad-tempered. He was bad-tempered with Starmer today. I think there's a crisis emerging in the Conservative Party. So my answer is, I think, yes, parliamentary democracy will come back. I think Starmer is very refreshing. I think the new generation of Labour, I can now, in my old age, say youngsters, people like Annalise Dodds, Nixon and Thomas and others are very impressive. And I think parliamentary democracy will be back strongly soon.
Okay, thank you. So there are several questions from our audience, and I welcome everyone. Is the question of the no deal, prospects of no deal, but in relation to COVID. So in your view, is COVID going to make no deal more palpable or less? One could argue that if one of the reasons for Brexit was the structural inequalities in the result of austerity, that COVID has made these worse. Another would be that the economy has you've already mentioned in your talk that it's been already so disruptive that it will be hard to disentangle what's caused by COVID. So several questions related to, do you think COVID will make no deal more or less likely?
I think no deal is just a political choice in the mind of the Prime Minister. We have a one-man democracy at the moment. I don't mean to say Boris Johnson somehow is anti-democratic or he's an Erdogan or he's a horrible guy. I don't think that myself. But the plain fact is, he stuffed the cabinet full of what Rachel Sylvester, the excellent Times columnist on politics, calls nodding dogs. And they are men and women without any independent views and mainly selected because of their support, particularly for Brexit. And they're seen as without any independence, so just do whatever the Prime Minister wants. Not on the whole. I mean, Margaret Thatcher had to constitute cabinets with real opposition inside them, even after she got rid of them. I mean, our tradition is that Britain is governed in a sense by a committee. It always has a strong committee chairman, the Prime Minister. Johnson's done away with that. And he seems to have put all his faith in Dominic Cummings. So Cummings certainly wants a no deal. There's an ideological faction that thinks, I mean, they are in traditional political terms revolutionaries. They're the Robespierres of Brexit. They're the Trotskys of the Brexit revolution. The worse, the better. The more dramatic it gets, and then Britain wakes up like the Russians will wake up and the French will wake up and discover the glories of the revolutionary moment that was now upon them. Good luck selling that to the British people, all I'd say is. And the point about Johnson is he is faithful to nothing except himself. He's not faithful to a political position. He's not faithful to colleagues. He's not faithful to his party particularly. He's certainly not faithful to women. He's faithful only to one thing and one idea, and that idea is Boris Johnson. He's achieved it now. He's Prime Minister. You know, he's like Macbeth after he's killed everybody. You know, there's nothing left for him to do. So if he decides the best way to stay in power is by accommodating to Europe, dishing the Whigs, as it was said in the by Disraeli in the 1840s, crossing the floor. Well, who knows? Who knows? I don't know, because it's all inside his psyche. This is mind at the moment. God sake, the poor man has been through a horrendous illness. I mean, half the people who go to intensive care don't come out. That's how serious it was. You can see it. I saw it today in the 5 o'clock conference. He is tired and throaty, and he was snappy in the House of Commons. I mean, frankly, the man should be on a very long convalescence period. So we'll see. Let's wait to the autumn.
Okay. We also have several questions from the audience about labor and labor strategy moving forward. So one of our viewers says that, you know, Boris, quoting, and he cites Goodwin, seems to have the electoral skeleton key, right-wing on culture, also willing to use government spending and stimulus. So there's a question ideologically of how labor, or tactically, ideologically, how labor should counter this electoral skeleton key, if you think it exists. And several have asked more specifically, what should Labour's strategy be on Brexit going forward?
Sure. Well, I've had these discussions almost every day with friends, MPs, ex-MPs, especially on what Labour strategy on Europe will be. I'll come to that in a second. Right now, it's a cop-out, not fair for a distinguished audience at York. But I just think with coronavirus overpowering everything, you can't produce sensible and good answers. It's too easy an equation to say, well, you can mix a bit of right-wing culture and a bit of state spending, and hey, presto, you've got a winning formula. Because to increase state spending, you've got to either borrow a lot of money, which can result in inflation, or you've got to tax people more. And there are lots and lots of Conservative constituencies who don't want to hear about taxation and couldn't give a flying F about whether Workington or Rother Valley has become a Conservative seat. They don't care. They want the same old protection of their income, and certainly no increase in taxes of any sort. Labour will have to see if Sir Keir Starmer connects through to the public. Jeremy Corbyn didn't, Ed Miliband didn't, Jim Callaghan didn't, Harold Wilson did, Tony Blair did. Clement Attlee did in 1945, he didn't in 1951, where he lost heavily. So, I mean, so far we've seen Starmer, the rather cautious lawyer, forensic, yes, and well prepared. I mean, for heaven's sake, he's a senior lawyer. Can he reach out beyond that and start to inspire? I don't know. My own view is I'm putting everything on hold until about this time next year, when we will have the results of the Scottish parliamentary elections. Can Labour win some seats back there, or is Labour just out of Scotland? We will have the results of the big city mayoral elections, London, Birmingham, Manchester, Newcastle, Liverpool. Will Labour hold Birmingham? Can Labour Conservatives defeat Sadiq Khan? And I just would respectfully say, because I don't think we're going to have a general election before 2024, I would say just wait and see. On Europe, my own view, but I've got to be very careful as a pro-European. I I would say that Labour should be trying to side more with business and expressing the concerns of business, not a sort of political case to stay in the EU. I think that ship has sailed, but certainly to be very critical of the government for playing very dangerously, playing with fire on a British economy that is more fragile than ever. And I'd also want to tear apart this notion that there are magical free trade deals with America or India or South Korea or wherever. There aren't. I mean, we're talking, as I said, we are part of the European greater economic region and world, always have been, always will be. So I try and find some shadow ministers, not maybe Sir Keir himself, who can articulate a bit of that.
And related to the question of leadership, Emily asks you if you could bring back a former minister, and you've known some back before then, if you could bring back a former minister to guide us through the next phase of Brexit, who would you bring back?
Oh my goodness, it's not Emily Thornberry, I hope. Hi Emily, hi, I'm sorry, my daughter's called Emily. So, oh, the what if question. Yeah, I mean, a mixture of Attlee, Wilson and Blair, but Blair up to the historic era, which, yes, which I'm writing about, of the Iraq War. It's a totally different debate, foreign policy of Blair, but he connected to the British people. He won 3 elections. And having any leader who makes that kind of connection is essential. And when you don't have them, we didn't have it with Callaghan, we didn't have it with Ed Miliband, we didn't have it with Corbyn, we didn't have it with Attlee when he insisted on fighting the 1951 election, then Labour won't do well and the Conservatives won't do well. I mean, we won't do well. I mean, but yeah, I think you could take out the best of the political DNA of Blair, Wilson, and Attlee. That would do me.
Okay, and we have about 6 minutes left. There's a debate on our Q&A on this question of, I guess, Remainers, and Brexiteers about the moving forward. So Tim asks, how can I convince Brexiteers that I'm not Remoaning when I challenge them that no deal is too big an economic price to pay for our country and that we should be more British and be pragmatic and have a deal?
Yeah.
Whereas another viewer asks, there is no way forward because we'll never fundamentally agree on with the EU on following the rules, which is an essential part of being an EU member. So in this polarized
those are good questions. Look,
what's the way forward?
Well, look, no European country agrees with the EU. Let's be very, very clear. The notion that everybody in Germany, Greece, Sweden, Poland, Portugal are robots, all sort of bowing before Brussels and doing whatever Brussels wants, is just rubbish. In fact, Britain was a much more rules-following member of the European Union than every other EU member state, I'd say. I tend to just try and get through to people. These are 27 sovereign independent states who've agreed to pool a bit of their sovereignty. That's true. They're giving about 1%, hopefully a bit more of their gross national income, GDP, if you like, to do things in common. 1%. I mean, the other 99% stays under the control of Germany, Italy, Slovenia, and Britain. And I've never known any super state. And if I said to my children, you must do what you're told, and you're only going to have 1% of your pocket money to spend on the way you want, they'd have killed me. So I think I wish we could get some of those arguments out. What will happen? I don't know. I mean, I've always thought we could leave the European Union, come out of the treaty, and I didn't want that, but Mrs. May could have said that, and then say to the Commons, we're now a sovereign independent state. The House of Commons can so decide, does it want to maintain regional economic relations? Your decision. We've always sought good entry into every market in Europe. Let's just keep it. We like people retiring in Europe. We can control people coming in from Europe. We have no ID cards, no registration, no apprenticeships. This is another debate, Nicole, forgive me. But it would have been very, very easy to alter the way we regulated and manage our internal labour market to manage correctly, as every other European country does. The idea that every European country, there are more Poles in Germany than there are in Britain. There are 600,000 Portuguese in France. Every European country is awash with people from other European countries who come to do principally low-paid labour in the past and then stayed and adapted. We're no different. Switzerland, the richest country in Europe, 26% of its population was born in the European Union. It's only in Britain we've had a xenophobic, populist, fairly extreme, from Enoch Powell to Nigel Farage, sadly adopted by the Conservative Party, say this decade, populist appeal to say these people are unwelcome. I mean, I welcome the fact that Johnson is offering 3.5 million Chinese from Hong Kong the right to reside in Britain. My God, if I walked up and down my old constituency in South Yorkshire saying, hey guys, we've got a Prime Minister who wants 3.5 million Chinese to come and live here, I'd have been torn from limb to limb. But Johnson is saying, send 3 million Europeans home, bring in 3 million Chinese. I just don't think this is workable.
But Dennis, I see that we have 2 minutes left, so this will have to be very quick. But one question from a viewer is, what was your pathway into politics? And would you advise any young viewers, or even not so young viewers out there, to do the same?
Yes, and yes. Politics is a noble calling. You want to change anything, you've got to do politics. It could be campaigning politics. My career, I started off as a trade union guy. I went into exile when Mrs. Thatcher was elected in 1979, worked based in Switzerland, but working all over Europe, in Poland with Solidarność, with black independent trade unions, with Lula in Brazil. And I wanted to make Europe work. And I just decided the best way to do that would be through the House of Commons. And I was wrong, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. But yes, politics is a very noble calling. Democracy needs people committed to politics. And I would tell anybody and everybody just to get involved. It's frustrating. It never ends in the success you hope. But en route, you achieve a few things, sometimes some big good things. And whichever party side you're on, and without the active participation of citizens, any country, it just dies on its feet.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you so much. We could have gone on for much longer, many questions that we didn't get to, so my apologies for those whose questions weren't asked. But the recording of this event will be available on the festival YouTube channel on the Watch Again section. We'll hope that you continue to be engaged with the York Festival ideas and see many more events. And Dennis's books will be available. Please see the website from an independent bookseller, which will sell many of Dennis's books. I've read Brexiternity and highly recommend, a great read. So thank you very, very much for joining us tonight, and thank you to everybody in our audience. Good night.